Hello everyone, welcome back to Plant Versus. Today we are going to explore one of the most spectacular ornamental flowering trees we can grow, the crepe myrtle, scientifically known as Legastroemia indica. When this plant comes into bloom, it can almost disappear beneath masses of flowers, creating an incredible display of color. If you love the visual impact of bougainvillea but don't want the challenge of mastering its watering requirements, then this plant is the easier option. And depending on how you train it, you can actually grow it as a compact shrub, a multi-stem specimen, or even a beautiful ornamental tree. Now in today's video, we're going to cover why crepe myrtle is one of the finest ornamental flowering trees, flower colors and varieties, growing it as a shrub or a tree, light and temperature requirements, soil mix and watering, fertilizers for maximum flowering, pruning techniques, common mistakes you need to avoid, seasonal beauty and flowering behavior. So with that being said, let's begin. What makes crepe myrtle such a spectacular ornamental plant is its ability to command attention. When it's in full bloom, the flowers can completely transform the appearance of the tree, creating a dramatic focal point in almost any landscape. But unlike plants that are attractive only during the flowering season, crepe myrtle has other qualities that keep it visually interesting all throughout the year. It has an attractive structure, beautiful foliage during the growing season, and distinctive bark that becomes particularly noticeable when the tree is bare. Another major advantage is its versatility. It can be maintained as a flowering shrub for small spaces or allowed to develop into a much larger ornamental tree when there's room for it to grow. That combination of spectacular flowering, adaptability, and seasonal interest is what makes crepe myrtle such a valuable landscape plant. Now let's talk about the feature that makes this plant so famous, its flowers. The individual flowers are relatively small, but they are produced in large clusters called panicles. The petals have a delicate crinkled appearance, almost resembling crepe paper, which is where the common name crepe myrtle comes from. When these flowers appear in large numbers, they create enormous airy masses of color that can almost look like clouds sitting over the canopy. And there is a remarkable range of colors available. Depending on the variety, you can find white, pink, rose, lavender, purple, magenta, red, and crimson flowers, along with different shades and cultivars. The flowering period can also be surprisingly long. Under favorable conditions, the crepe myrtle can continue producing flowers for several months during the warmer part of the year. So, whether you are planting one specimen or several throughout the landscape, the flowering display can become one of the strongest visual elements of the garden. One of the things that I particularly like about crepe myrtle is that you have considerable control over its form. If you have limited space, you can easily maintain it as a compact flowering shrub through regular pruning. But if you have more space, then you can definitely train it into a larger tree. You can develop a single trunk form for more formal appearance or allow multiple stems to grow for more natural sculptural look. If you are creating a tree form, gradually remove the lower branches while allowing the main framework to develop. The multi-stem form can be specifically attractive during winter because once the leaves have fallen, the branching structure becomes the part of the visual appeal. By the way, this plant is not evergreen, it is a deciduous plant. It means this can go into dormancy during winter time. So whether you plant it as a shrub for smaller garden or a statement tree for larger landscape, crepe myrtle can adapt beautifully to both. Now let's talk about the sunlight because this has direct impact on the flowering. Crepe myrtle is extremely sun-loving plant, and for the best flowering performance, aim for around 6 to 8 hours of direct sunlight every day. It can tolerate some partial shade. This is one of those plants where giving it a bright open position can make a dramatic difference to its performance. Temperature is also extremely important. Crepe myrtle performs particularly well in warm growing conditions, and once established, it can tolerate considerable amount of summer heat. So if you are growing it primarily for its flowers, choose a location where it can receive plenty of direct sunlight and has enough space to develop naturally. Crepe myrtle isn't particularly difficult about soil, but good drainage is essential. For container growing, a practical mix would be 40% garden soil, 30% well decomposed compost, 20% river sand, and 10% cocoa peat. This will give you a good balance between drainage, moisture retention, and organic matter. Young plant needs regular watering while establishing themselves. Here's something to note. If you are gonna grow it in a pot, then choose at least 16 to 18 inch of the pot because the roots need space to develop. And once mature, crepe myrtle becomes relatively drought tolerant. However, drought tolerant doesn't mean you should allow the soil to remain completely dry for long periods. Let the upper layer dry slightly between watering, but avoid keeping the roots constantly saturated. Too much water reduces oxygen around the roots and can eventually weaken the plant. So the goal is very simple. Good drainage, adequate moisture, and no constantly waterlogged soil. Now let's talk about fertilizers. You will often see fertilizers labeled as NPK. NPK stands for nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. For young plants that are still establishing themselves, a balanced fertilizer such as NPK 10-10-10 or NPK 19-19-19 can be used during active growth. For mature plants where flowering is your top priority, a fertilizer relatively lower nitrogen content with higher phosphorus and potassium can be used, such as NPK 10-20-20 or NPK 5-10-10. Apply fertilizers about every 4 to 6 weeks during active growth, following the manufacturer's recommended doses. Also, don't overdo nitrogen because too much nitrogen can produce a vigorous foliage and encourage vegetative growth instead of flowering. Also, make sure the organic matter are well decomposed so that the nutrients are available in the soil. Now coming to pruning. Pruning is particularly important because crepe myrtle flowers on new wood, meaning the fresh growth produced during the current growing season. Structural pruning is best performed during late winter, before the new growth begins. Start by removing the dead, damaged or diseased or crossing branches. If you are growing it as a shrub, light pruning can encourage branching and help maintain a fuller shape. If you are training it as a tree, gradually remove the lower branches while preserving the main framework. Also, there's one pruning mistakes you should definitely avoid. It's called crepe murder. This means severely cutting back the main branches every year. Although the plant might survive, this can produce weak shoots and destroy the tree's natural structure. Instead, allow the plant to develop into its natural form. You can also remove the spent flower clusters through deadheading, which, under suitable conditions, can encourage another flush of flowers. Now, let's talk about some of the common mistakes you need to avoid. There are few mistakes that can easily reduce the flowering performance of crepe myrtle. First, insufficient sunlight. Too much shade can result in plenty of foliage but disappearing flower. Second is overwatering. Mature crepe myrtles don't need constantly wet soil and poor drainage can weaken the roots. Third, giving excessive nitrogen. Too much nitrogen fertilizers can encourage vegetative growth and less flowers. Fourth, severe pruning. Repeatedly cutting back the main branches can lead to weak growth and an unnatural looking structure. And finally, don't panic when the plant loses all its leaves during winter. Crepe myrtle is deciduous and leaf drop is completely normal and natural part of its yearly cycle. And this is perhaps one of the most fascinating thing about crepe myrtle. Its appearance changes dramatically throughout the year. In spring, fresh foliage and vigorous new shoots emerge as the plant comes out of dormancy. As the temperature rises, new growth develops and flower buds begin to form. Then comes summer, when the tree reaches its spectacular flowering stage. The canopy becomes covered with masses of colorful flowers, creating this distinctive cloud like appearance. In autumn, depending on the variety and growing conditions, the foliage can turn shades of yellow, orange, bronze, and crimson before eventually falling. Then comes winter. This tree becomes bare and enters dormancy. But even then, it retains the visual interest. Its bark naturally exfoliates, revealing smooth layers underneath in shades of cream cinnamon, silver, and grey. So crepe myrtle isn't simply a tree that looks beautiful when in flowers. It goes through an entire cycle of transformation. From fresh spring growth to spectacular summer flowers to autumn color and finally its sculptural winter form. And when spring arrives again, the cycle begins once more. Crepe myrtle is a remarkable combination of beauty, versatility, and relatively easy to care. You can grow it as a compact shrub or train it into a magnificent ornamental tree. Its flowers can completely transform a landscape during summer, while its autumn foliage and winter bark ensure the plant continue to offer the visual interest even after the flowering is over. If you are looking for an ornamental flowering plant that can bring color, structure, and character to your garden while giving you flexibility to save it according to your space, even in small compact spaces like a small garden, then crepe myrtle is definitely worth consideration. Well, that's all for today. Thank you so much for watching this video on plant verses. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with another plant lover. And let me know in the comments which crepe myrtle flower color would you choose for your garden. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you in the next garden video.